And we are going to go to the last talk of the session, and that talk will be given by Stefan Okar. Stefan, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Is this coming through clearly?
Yes.
So all right, great.
And the title of the talk is Modeling System Response for Neutron Spectroscopic Correlations. Please go ahead when you're ready.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Professor Jovanovic. My name is Stefan Oker. I am a postmaster's researcher at the University of Michigan, working with Professor Pozzi. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the techniques that our group has been using to model system response to unfold neutron spectroscopic correlations. So special nuclear material is characterized by fission. During fission, an unstable nucleus will split into fragments that have a particular excitation energy and angular momentum. These fragments lose these properties through the emission of neutrons followed by photons. Because both neutron and photon emission dissipate both excitation energy and angular momentum from the fragments, we can intuit that there is a competition between neutron and photon emission. This competition is predicted by fission event generators, as we can see in the plots on the right, where we have the photon multiplicity on the x-axis and the neutron multiplicity on the y-axis. The data is predicted event by event multiplicity combinations for californium-252. We can see from the trend lines that both the fission event generators CGMF and FRIA predict that as photon multiplicity increases, the average neutron multiplicity decreases, and vice versa. We can compare this to the MCMP Polimi results, where neutron multiplicity and photon multiplicity are independently sampled, and therefore there is no correlation. And these results from the fission event generators need to be validated by experimental results. So with the development of fast detectors, in this case organic simulators capable of detecting both neutrons and photons, we can measure these correlations on an event-by-event basis. However, we know from threshold effects and cross-section considerations that detector response is not uniform as a function of energy, as shown in the plot on the left, where we have the simulated detector efficiency for a particular system as a function of particle energy. In addition, we know that the multiplicity covariance also varies as a function of particle energy. This is also predicted by the fission event generators. However, in the plot on the right, we also have experimental data to show this variation. So this is the energy-dependent covariance between neutron and photon emission as measured as a function of neutron time of flight energy and photon deposition energy. As we can see, that this is clearly not uniform. Because both of these are the case, an energy-dependent unfolding has to be performed in order to determine the emitted particle covariance. And the goal of this presentation is to present the methods that we have used so far to perform this energy-dependent unfolding. The relevance to the mission of the NNSA is that improved fast neutron detection and unfolding techniques can allow for the development of improved verification and safeguard systems. Compared to things like helium-3, which is difficult to source, or highly pressurized helium-4 tubes, these detectors are considerably cheaper. Additionally, because they are crystals and liquids, we have flexibility in form factor, and with the development of silicon photomultipliers, these detectors can be very small for specialized uses. And finally, with the ability to measure these higher order event-by-event correlations, improved characterization can be achieved. The analysis that I will describe here is performed on data taken at the Kainu Array at Los Alamos National Labs. So again, this was 42 EJ309 liquid scintillator detectors placed approximately 1 meter away from a spontaneously fissioning californium-252 source. The analysis is performed in the following steps. First, we construct a high fidelity simulation of the system. We then use the simulation to develop energy-dependent response matrices. These response matrices are used in an unfolding algorithm, which we apply and verify on spectral measured data. And then this unfolding algorithm is then applied to the neutron-photon multiplicity covariance, and we compare the results to the results from fission event generators. So to begin, we want to fine-tune an MCMP simulation of the system to match two experimental characteristics: the neutron light-out response functions and the detector distances. The neutron light-out response is measured by taking a time-of-flight experiment where a Californian source is placed at the face of one of these detectors as a start signal, and then a measurement detector is placed approximately 2 meters away. The neutron time-of-flight signal from this setup is divided into different time-of-flight energy regions, as we can see in the legend on the plot on the lower left. The pulse height distribution, or the light out distribution, in this case pulse integral, for these different distributions is plotted, smooth, and then the derivative of these distributions is fit with a Gaussian. This Gaussian is taken as the measured response of the liquid simulator to neutrons of these energy ranges. The measured response is shown in the middle plot in green, where it is fit with a 3-parameter exponential light output function. However, as we looked at the experimental data we saw in this plot on the left, this is all of the different detector light output distributions, and we see significant variation. This indicates to us that the light output response might also vary detector by detector as well. And so a parameter search in the ABC detectors, in the ABC parameters, for the light output function was performed to match simulation and experiment detector to detector. So we see in the middle plot, the red lines are each detector's response function. And on the right, we have the experimental and simulated data agreeing well. And we see that all of the response functions in the light output plot are within 2 sigma of the measured response. The second thing that we do is we fine-tune the detector distances. So when comparing experimental and simulated data, there was some discrepancy in between the time of flight when looked at on the nanosecond scale. One of the things that we noticed was that in simulation, the rising edge of the neutron time of flight distribution was very consistent across different light output functions. So in this plot, we have in orange 20 different light output functions, and we see that this rising neutron time of flight edge is very consistent across all of them. We therefore determined corrected detector distances by using a time of flight CFD method, where 50% of the maximum of this time of flight distribution was tagged as a time of flight CFD, and then in simulation detectors were moved back and forth in order to match experiment and simulation. Using this method, the detectors were corrected on the order of about a few centimeters for most of them. Having fine-tuned the simulation, we can now use it to construct response matrices. So the emitted spectra of interest, 0 to 10 MeV for neutrons and 0 to 4 MeV for photons, is divided into energy bins EI. We then simulate a uniform distribution of energies and the range EI using MCMP Galimi to determine the system response. And this response is, what is the probability that a particle emitted at energy EI will be detected in energy bin DJ? And these responses are normalized such that the sum over of one column of these responses is the energy dependent efficiency for that emitted energy. An example of this is shown here for a neutron emitted at 4 MeV in this Kainu system. And we see the response here, where we see a broad peak due to time resolution, and then also other effects due to crosstalk and room return and so on. Now that we have these response matrices, we can unfold the emitted covariance from the measured data. This unfolding requires us to invert the response matrices R. And unfortunately, the response matrices are poorly conditioned, particularly for the neutron system response, and that makes the inversion of these matrices unstable. We therefore stabilize the inversion by implementing Tikhonov regularization technique, and that is that the unfolding the unfolding matrix, instead of just being R inverse, is replaced with this term, where alpha is our regularization parameter. And as alpha goes to 0, this term goes to R inverse. We verify this unfolding method on the particle spectra, as well as to determine correct values for the coefficients alpha. And we can see in the lower left plot the application to neutrons for 2 different thresholds. For 100 keV we see that the measured time of flight in blue and the unfolded spectrum in orange, and the unfolded spectrum agrees well with the MCMP neutron spectrum for energies greater than approximately 1 MeV, and this is very promising. The unfolding breaks down at higher energies, at lower thresholds. So for 40 keV, while we might expect to be able to unfold a greater portion of the neutron spectrum, here the spectra only really agree after about 1.5 MeV. In the bottom right, we see the same results for photons, where again, measured spectrum is in blue, unfolded is in orange. And here we are comparing the unfolded spectrum to the MCMP spectrum. We see that the broad characteristics of the spectrum are well preserved even at lower thresholds. And we also should note here that direct comparison between the unfolded spectrum in orange and the MCMP spectrum in green is not quite appropriate, because the Californian photon emission spectrum is relatively poorly known. However, this verifies that the unfolding works, and it gives us a range of alpha parameters for the double unfolding. So then we apply both neutron and photon unfolding to the measured covariance, and we get the results shown here. So here we are looking at the unfolded covariance as a function of threshold. We have the results from the fission event generators, CGMF in blue, a slightly modified version of Freya that we use internally in orange. And we can see that the trend is a more negative covariance as the threshold decreases. Then we also have our energy independent unfolding in green, and we can compare that to our energy dependent unfolding in red. The lack of error bars on the energy dependent unfolding is not taken as a sign of accuracy. This double unfolding is extremely dependent on the choices of our regularization parameters. So if they change by 10 to 20%, these numbers go crazy. Whereas for the spectrum unfolding, the regularization parameters could change by a few orders of magnitude and remain stable. Another indication that these preliminary results should not be quite trusted is that we expect the energy dependent unfolding to consistently change the energy independent results. That means that this red line should either be consistently above or below the energy independent unfolding line. And the fact that it's not means that this method needs improvement. However, if this method can be further developed, the goal of this research is to be able to validate these fission event generators and motivate changes in their physical parameters. Further, this unfolding method that I have described here can be applied to the other energy-dependent covariances that we have heard about from my colleagues earlier in this afternoon, such as neutron energy angle and photon energy multiplicity covariances, among others. Finally, if this method can be validated and trusted, measured data regarding higher order covariances could be added to nuclear data files. As far as the MTV Impact, we have been working in collaboration with many other MTV members who are also interested in event-by-event fission data. That includes us, the fission group at the University of Michigan. And we've also collaborated extensively with Lawrence Livermore, Lawrence Berkeley, and Los Alamos National Labs for help on fission codes and modeling. And finally, we have an upcoming experiment testing the FS3 system at Oak Ridge, and we are grateful to all of our collaborators. In conclusion, both neutron multiplicity covariance and particle detection vary with energy. This motivates us to create an energy-dependent unfolding method. We do this by creating system response matrices using a high-fidelity simulation. And then we show that unfolding of neutron and photon signals is possible, but more work has to be done when performing both unfolding in the case of the choice of our regularization parameters. Finally, this research will lead to, is at its core a fundamental physics research, and will allow us to have a better understanding of fission. However, along with the development of organic scintillator detector arrays, can lead to improved safeguards and non-proliferation systems. Some next steps are, again, as I've mentioned, to develop better methods for determining the choice of our regularization parameters, as well as to compare current data to data with additional cleaning. So we're working on applying kinematic cuts and improved PSD to the data. And then finally, with upcoming experiments, we can apply this unfolding to those data and compare KINU data to new experiments to see if results are similar. With that, I'd like to thank the consortium, as well as the NNSA and Department of Energy, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stefan, for this nice presentation. This is the last talk of the session, and we have a question from Ramona. The question is, why do you think the difference between the covariance for CGMF and Freya is relatively large?
Yes. So that is this result. So as I mentioned, this is a slightly modified version of Freya that we are using internally. Before these modifications, Freya and CGMF did agree were much more consistent in the unfolded covariance. This is just sort of a choice of which Freya.
Okay, I had a question about your slide 6. If you can go back to slide 6. I think it's slide 6. Mm-hmm. Yes. So I'm trying. So what are the dashed lines on the plot on the left?
Yes. Sorry. This is a sort of a dense plot, although it might not seem like it. So these different solid lines are the light output distributions for the different neutron energy ranges. The dashed lines are, after smoothing this curve, we find the derivative of these spectra. And in this plot, the dashed lines are scaled in order to all be visible. And so then the derivative of the light out spectrum, the final sort of peak, is fit to a Gaussian due to energy broadening. And this is taken as our measured light output response for neutrons, for really protons in the scintillator with these energy ranges.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? If not, I had one more question, which is related to the choice of detector medium. So when it comes to spectral energy output measurement of the light output spectrum and the energy unfolding, then one possibility that you might have is to use materials which have more pronounced response function, such as deuterium. So for example, the deuterated simulators could perhaps provide a much higher fidelity signal for that spectral unfolding. So I was just wondering whether you consider that. Is that just practically impossible to do in these measurements, or is it just a matter of resources?
Honestly, I haven't really researched deuterated scintillators. What I can say is that our goals with this research are sort of to balance two things. One is our understanding of the sort of spectra, how well we can measure the spectra. And so KINU was developed as a spectrometer, and that's why it has the 1 meter flight path. And then on the other hand, we want to balance that ability to define an energy with efficiencies, with the ability to detect high multiplicities for particular fission events. I'm not sure how this would relate to the deuterated scintillators, but this is why, for example, in Isabel's presentation, the FS3 system is so close, is to try and get that higher efficiency. So those are the generally the two considerations when looking at both detector medium as well as array shape and design.
Thank you. We have a question on the chat from Ahmed Bartuz-Zaman, and the question is, how well do you know the cross-section data for the simulations you're doing?
So these simulators are hydrogen and carbon, and so the hydrogen cross-section data is very well understood, and I think carbon is also pretty well understood. So that is a good sign as well, right? We achieved pretty good agreement between simulation and experimental results for our detected parameters, for the detected spectra and count rates and all that stuff. So that would also indicate good understanding of the cross-section data.
Thank you. There are no further questions. We are at the end of this long session.